Hello everybody, welcome back. Today we are looking at Wim Wenders. Now Wim Wenders is a film director, particularly well known for Paris, Texas, and he has a very beautiful visual style that's often compared to painters. He sort of creates great visual landscapes and great use of colour and in his scenes. He's very real visual artist. Now, what's interesting is Wim Wenders has actually had a couple of recently photography exhibitions in London, so he's been a character that's quite known in other art circles. And so what's interesting is there was this recent piece of non-fiction book of his published of essays that he's written on other artists and his appreciation of other artists' work. It's called The Pixels of Paul Cezanne. So as you can imagine, Paul Cezanne is one of the artists in here. So what's interesting is the variety of artists that Wim Wenders has decided to write about. So there's film directors, obviously there's Ingmar Bergman and there's Michelanelo Antonioni. But he also brings in dancers like a Pina Bausch and photographers, Peter Lindbergh. He talks about the artwork of Edward Hopper, of Andrew Wyeth, of Paul Cezanne. And he also brings in fashion designer Yohji Yamamoto. Now there's a lot of that, particularly with Yohji Yamamoto, is would you consider fashion art? And I found this fascinating. So these essays were not only a great glimpse of Wim Wenders' personal, cultural and artistic inspiration, creative inspiration, where he drives his ideas from, which I loved. I particularly loved the essay on Andrew Wyeth and how that isolation and that loneliness and the great beauty American landscape was just really, he's an artist that I have a particular fan of as well, and so it was great to see Wim inspired by him too. No surprise that he's inspired by Edward Hopper. A huge amount of people who work in American 20th century sort of landscapes and rural scapes are very influenced by Hopper, obviously, understandably. But it's really fascinating the way his essays sort of pick apart at what we consider art. Because it's interesting that he chose Pina Bausch, and fascinating that he went for Yohji Yamamoto. And you just think, is a fashion designer art? And what is it that you're responding to in Yamamoto's work that you would consider art? And I found this, as somebody who writes in arts and culture, really interesting, because the oldest debate of all is what is art? I don't have an answer, by the way. Nobody really does, although lots of people try. So this book was really pushing at the boundaries of what is art, as well as what a creative inspiration is. Now, what I also liked about this book is that they're not all essays. Sometimes Wim would write in poetry. So for example, it's a poem that he wrote on Paul Cezanne. So as you can see, he doesn't necessarily revel in great lengthy essays. It's quite a short book, as you can see. And I really enjoyed this. He's not the only person. I think on Samuel Fuller, he also writes some poetry as well. And there's lots of pictures in here as well to go along with explaining it. So there's pictures of Andrew Wyeth's paintings in here, and he also liked the photography of Peter Lindbergh. So he's got the very famous supermodel pictures as well. And why it's unusual, because you think, well, this, for example, is a very iconic photo. We all know this picture from Vogue. So it's interesting that Wim Wenders has taken this and said there is something Peter Lindbergh's, the way he disarms the supermodels and the way that they look, the way that they're sort of cut and framed, and just interesting where he draws inspiration. And for someone who's trying to create myself in the artistic expression, really interesting about what he's looking at, what he's drawing upon from images that I might just flash past and think, oh, that's just a magazine image, oh, that's just a piece of clothing. And Andrew Wyeth, obviously the masterful Christina's World. And what he's looking at and saying, this is what I'm inspired by when I produce these films. This is what I'm looking to cover. This is what I'm looking to replicate. I really love this book. It's really, I'm not a huge aficionado on Wim Wenders' film work. I can't say that I know his stuff, all of his back catalogue, all of his bibliography inside out. However, I am fascinated about art and artists. And yes, I know a lot about Paul Cezanne, and yes, I know a lot about Andrew Wyeth, but it was fascinating to hear more about how he worked alongside Yamamoto, what he's picking up in Lindbergh, what he's picking up in other photographers' work. What else has he got here? Oh yeah, Anthony Mann, Barbara Clem. So really who he's picking out and why. So this is very much for those who have that kind of interest in artistic and creative inspiration, and something that I really enjoyed and took a lot from. I think it's going to be one of those rare books that I go back and reread. You know, when something's quite dense and there's a lot of ideas going and there's a lot in there. Easy to read, but there's just so much that stimulated me that I think I have to go back and think more about what Wim was saying and what he was drawing upon. Anyway, Wim Wenders, The Pixels of Paul Cezanne. Great for those who are fascinated by art and creative inspiration.